before we start. Make sure you're really alone. Go ahead, check your door, your window. Done? Good. Now keep them closed until I finish telling you what happened. The man with the axe. I've been hiking solo for about 6 years now, and I'm comfortable enough in the wilderness that I don't need to stick to main trails anymore, which is probably what got me into this situation in the first place. This happened last October in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. I had driven up from Virginia for a long weekend, planning to hit some of the more remote sections that didn't see much traffic. The weather was perfect. Mid-50s, if I had to guess. Overcast, but not rainy. And I was looking forward to some real solitude. I was maybe 4 hours into the hike when I reached what I can only describe as a gorge. It wasn't some massive canyon or anything, but it was deep enough. Probably 30 or 40 feet down to a rocky bottom with a small creek running through it. Not a guaranteed death if you fell, but you'd definitely break something. And the walls looked impossible to climb with all that loose shale and overhang. There was this massive fallen oak wedged between both sides at a slight angle. It was pretty thick, the bark worn smooth from weather and probably other hikers using it as a bridge. I inspected it for a few minutes to make sure it was sturdy, then decided it looked solid enough for me. I took my time getting across, trying to maintain focus. I safely reached the other side, and by the time I was back on solid ground, I realized I'd gotten a really nice adrenaline rush from the balancing act. But then I heard this rhythmic thunking sound behind me. I turned around, and there was a guy on the other side of the gorge, maybe 10 feet from where the tree met the bank. He was older, definitely in his 50s, wearing a ratty camo jacket and old-looking jeans. He also had a scraggly beard that made him look like your stereotypical lumberjack. It took me a second to realize what he was holding. An axe, a full-size axe. Maybe he really was a lumberjack, but I couldn't think. I was still in shock at the sight of it. He walked right over to the base of the tree and started swinging his axe at it. I shouted across at him, asking what the hell he was doing. He didn't even look up. He just kept swinging. To my horror, I watched as one of his swings landed a little deeper than the others, and the tree shifted slightly. I yelled louder, telling him to stop and that I'd just crossed the gorge on that thing. It dawned on me that this guy probably already knew that, and he was trying to strand me on the other side. He didn't show any signs of stopping, so I yelled increasingly insulting things at him, stuff that didn't even make sense. I finally yelled that I'd need to cross back to the other side, and that's when he finally looked up at me and said, "That's not my problem." He said it so casually, like I'd asked him about the weather. I don't know why, but his casual tone infuriated me, and I admit I kind of lost it a little. I started full-on screaming at him. I said some nasty things, and in hindsight, that probably wasn't the brightest decision. I can't remember exactly what, but something I must have said hit a nerve because he stopped swinging the axe abruptly. He set it down on the ground before taking a few steps closer to the edge. I could see his face more clearly after that, and it was not a pleasant sight. His eyes were sunken and dark, almost like the skin around them was dark too, if that makes any sense. He leaned over the edge and told me something that I'll never forget. "I know these woods a lot better than you do." Something about the way he said it scared me. Not threatening exactly, but certain. Like he was stating a fact I'd be stupid to argue with. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then he picked up the axe, turned around, and walked back into the trees. I didn't say anything after him. What was there to say? I stood there trying to process what had happened. The tree was still wedged in place, but I could tell it wasn't stable anymore. The edge on his side was splintered and cracked. I wanted to cross back right then and there, but there was no way I was entrusting my weight to that tree now. I pulled out my phone, but it had 0 service. I decided to cut the hike short. I was mad for sure, but I was also genuinely spooked. I think anyone else in my position would have been too. Something about that encounter felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I started walking downstream, figuring I'd find another crossing and that it would take me back in the direction I'd come from anyway. But I was dead wrong. I walked for what must have been an hour, and the gorge only got deeper. I was pretty sure the gap was widening too. I kept thinking I'd find a spot where I could cross, but every turn just revealed more impossible terrain. To make matters worse, the sun was starting to drop, and I was beginning to panic. It was getting dark, and I was miles from my car in the opposite direction I needed to go. I started seriously considering whether I'd have to climb down into the gorge and back out, as insane as that seemed. Just then, I stumbled on what looked like a campsite. It was sitting in this little clearing with a fire pit that looked recently used. At first I was relieved, thinking maybe there was a fellow camper or hiker who could help me. But the more I looked around, the more wrong it felt. I realized there were carvings on the surrounding trees, not initials or anything recognizable, just deep gouges and symbols. There were also a bunch of weird objects scattered around, like rusted tools and pieces of cloth tied to branches, and what looked like animal bones arranged in patterns. It was freaky. As soon as I saw that stuff, I basically hightailed it out of there. I was about twice as scared as I had been 2 minutes ago, which was saying something. And then, as if it couldn't get any worse, I started hearing sounds behind me, stalking me. Footsteps, or something like footsteps. Every time I spun around, everything went silent. I started thinking some kind of predator was trailing me. I picked up my pace, hoping whatever was behind me would lose interest, but no. If anything, the sounds only got louder, and honestly, a little closer. What happened next is still the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. As soon as I heard the next sound, I looked over my shoulder for the 20th time and caught a glimpse of someone ducking behind a tree. A person. I froze and scanned the trees, and I realized there wasn't just one. There was another figure further to the left. They'd fanned out. I was being herded. I don't know what made me realize they'd given up on hiding, but suddenly I could hear them moving more openly. I saw what looked like a pipe or a club in one of their hands, and that was it. I started running, knowing I couldn't play dumb for much longer, and the exact thing I was dreading happened. They started chasing after me, clearly not concerned with being stealthy anymore. I can't explain how scary it was. I didn't even know what they wanted. I was in the middle of the woods, lost, and the sun had almost set. I felt like I was in a life or death situation, which is probably how I was able to run so fast for so long. I ran faster than I knew I could, and definitely faster than I'd ever run before. One of the people behind me started screaming. Not words, just screams like war cry type screams, the stuff of nightmares. I kept running, the gorge still on my left, and just when I felt myself slowing down out of exhaustion, I saw another fallen tree. It was much smaller than the first one had been, but I didn't have a choice. Without thinking, I mounted it and started making my way across. I didn't even have time to see if it was sturdy. Thinking about it now, I was betting my entire life on a tree. It was so tense and I was so tired that I honestly thought I was going to slip and fall. It held up and I made it across. As soon as I did, I turned around. There were actually 3 figures following me, and they all looked like carbon copies of that first guy who had stranded me. They were filthy, and one of them was indeed holding a pipe. I watched as the first one put his hand on the tree like he was going to cross, then stepped back down. The 3 of them looked at me menacingly, and for some reason I found myself unable to move again. Then one of them told me to get the fuck out of there and that I had gotten lucky, and that was all I needed to hear. I turned and did exactly what they told me to. I kept expecting to hear them behind me, but the forest had gotten eerily quiet. The darkness didn't help either, and there were a couple of times when I had to fight a full-on breakdown. I must have run at an angle that eventually brought me back toward the trailhead, or maybe I just got impossibly lucky. But I did eventually find it. I reported what I could after driving back home, but I knew there was nothing anyone could or would do. It's been months now. I still hike, but it's honestly not as enjoyable anymore. I really hope I start enjoying it again, because hiking used to be my absolute favorite thing to do. And now I can't even enjoy it without thinking about that experience. It was just so freaky. That first guy with the axe especially. The way he looked at me when he said those things, as if he knew exactly what was going to happen to me. He probably did. Hell, he probably orchestrated it all. It terrifies me to think that I might have lost my life that day in the woods. The wolves and the smoke. This happened 3 years ago. I know a lot of people drag things out, but I don't see the need to do that, so I'm just going to say exactly what happened as it happened. I was hiking through a remote section of forest in northern Minnesota, way off any marked trails. I've always preferred it that way. The actual wilderness, not the sanitized version you get on popular trails with their wooden markers and worn paths. Just me in the woods, the way they're supposed to be. I'd been out there for maybe 4 hours when I noticed I'd lost my bearings. It happens sometimes when you're not following a trail, but usually I can orient myself pretty quickly. This time was different. Nothing looked familiar. The sun was still high enough that I wasn't in immediate danger, but that sick feeling of being lost was already settling into my stomach. I tried to stay calm and kept walking, telling myself I'd spot something recognizable soon. But instead, I started picking up on this rustling sound behind me. The last thing you'd want to hear if you're in my position. The rustling wasn't constant, just every 30 seconds or so, like something was matching my pace. I'd stop and it would stop too. I'd start walking and there it was again. I kept telling myself it was probably a deer, but I'd hiked enough times to know that deer don't follow people like that. I kept going, but at that point, I was pretty sure I was being stalked by something. And then, all at once, the rustling turned into movement all around me. It was a worst-case scenario. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I was surrounded on all sides by a pack of wolves. 6 or 7 of them, if I had to guess. Some of them were snarling at me, and some of them were just staring. But it was clear to me that, to them, I was a meal. I wasn't going to go down without a fight, though. I had my knife out, even though I knew the odds were stacked against me. I remember thinking, this is it. This is actually how I'm going to die. Alone in the woods because I was too stubborn to stick to the marked trails. I was trying to decide if I should make myself big or stay still or what, when every single wolf suddenly went rigid, all at once. Not like they were reacting to each other, but rather reacting to something else. Their ears shot up and they all looked in the same direction, somewhere over my shoulder. And then they just scattered. Scattered as in full-on sprint in the opposite direction from where they'd been looking, almost like they were the ones being hunted. That's when the fear started setting in for real. Until that point, it had just been a wicked adrenaline rush, which makes sense given the life-or-death scenario I thought I was in. But once I was alone again, I started getting the creeps. The first thing I noticed after the wolves scampered away was that the woods were completely silent. No wind, no birds, no critters, nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch in there. It was still light out, but things felt a little dimmer, sort of how your vision fades when you're lightheaded or right before you're about to pass out. But the worst part by far was why the wolves had run off in the first place. I mean, they had been scared of something. That much was obvious. But whatever could have scared off an entire pack of wolves from a long distance away, I couldn't imagine. I needed to keep moving, but I felt really unsettled even in the daylight. I kind of wanted to follow the wolves, but I was pretty certain I had been walking in the right direction to begin with. So I was at a crossroads. Follow the wolves just to potentially get encircled again and get even more lost, or continue in the right direction and possibly encounter whatever it was that had scared them off. An impossible choice. I ultimately decided to keep walking in the direction I thought would take me out of the woods, which meant walking toward whatever it was that the wolves had been freaked out by. My logic was that I could waste an hour walking the way the wolves had come from, only to turn around anyway and have to walk back in the dark, or just bite my tongue and walk that way while I still had daylight. So that's what I did. Maybe 20 minutes later, I saw what looked like a clearing up ahead. For a second, I thought it might have been a campsite. I could see what looked like a fire ring, but as I got closer, I realized it was wrong. All wrong. There were symbols carved into the trees surrounding the clearing. Not initials or trail markers. These were intentional, deep cuts forming patterns I didn't recognize. It gets worse though. Things were hanging from the branches on what looked like leather cords. Some looked like bones, small ones, maybe from birds or rodents. Others were metal, rusted, and twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. The fire pit in the center wasn't just a ring of stones. The stones were delicately stacked on top of one another, like structures. There was weird stuff in the fire pit too. Pieces of cloth, what looked like jewelry, and other objects I couldn't really identify. But here's what made me really freak out. The smoke. There was this thick black smoke just hanging in the air about 6 feet from the ground. It wasn't moving or dissipating, and it didn't look like it was coming from the fire pit either. It was just there. I really wish I could say it was just leftover smoke from the fire pit. The fire pit didn't even look like it had been used recently. I stood at the edge of that clearing, frozen to the spot. For some reason, I just couldn't look away from that smoke. My eyes kept tracking back to it even when I tried focusing on something else. I really have trouble describing the feeling, but it felt like I was looking through a window at something instead of just being there. Like I was standing in my kitchen window looking out into the backyard, instead of actually being in the backyard. I don't know what that means, but that's what it felt like. There was this feeling building in my chest, like grief and terror mixed together, but for some reason, it hadn't happened yet. It was almost like my body was mourning something in advance. I've never felt anything like it before or since. I must have stood there for 5 minutes just staring at that smoke before something in my brain finally kicked back online. And no, the smoke didn't dissipate in that time. It just stayed there. I finally worked up the strength to turn around and run. I didn't walk or jog. I literally ran. I was overwhelmed with fear. I didn't know what I was running from, but there was this feeling in my gut that told me I needed to get out of the woods. My memory kind of gets foggy after that. I think it's because of how scared I was. So scared that my instincts took over. But part of me thinks the reason my memory faded was somehow connected to whatever the hell was in the woods. The smoke, or the thing that caused the smoke, or something else entirely. I don't know. The next thing I remember is it being dark out, meaning I must have been in those woods for another good hour or so. I was drenched in sweat and, strangely, freezing cold at that point, but I was nearly out of the woods. I was approaching my car. I got in and drove off without another thought, and that was that. I never reported what I found. What would I even say? I couldn't find that clearing again if I tried, and that's even if I remembered things clearly, which I didn't. This will forever be one of those experiences that just doesn't have an explanation. When I told my dad about what happened, he just said that everyone has that one experience sooner or later. Well, this is mine. And the thing that I still think about from time to time is not how those wolves behaved, how that campsite looked, or even that impossible smoke that just hung in the air. It's the memory loss. From all the research I've done, scary moments get remembered better, not worse. So I have no choice but to think that everything that happened that day was connected. The Easter Bunny in the church basement. This happened when I was a little kid, maybe 6 or 7. My family has always been very religious, so Easter has always been a huge deal for us, same with most of the other major religious holidays. Now that I think of it, even Sunday felt like its own holiday with the way my parents treated church. It's actually kind of funny. Some of my earliest memories are church-related, and what I'm about to tell you is one of them. It was Easter Sunday, so all the services were much longer than usual, but I didn't mind. My parents instilled the love of Christ in me very early on. After the service was Sunday school, or CCD as our church called it. I know lots of churches don't offer Sunday school after really important masses, but ours did. So after the mass, my parents took me downstairs to all the classrooms like they had done 100 times, and I said goodbye. I'm just going to describe the layout of the church now so this story makes sense. Our church had a kind of split-level layout. The main sanctuary was upstairs where the altar and pews were, and all the classrooms were in the basement. It was technically a basement, but because the church sat on a slope, you could still get in and out of the building from down there. There was a long carpeted hallway with maybe 7 or 8 rooms branching off on each side, grouped by age. My classroom was one of the first ones on the left. At the very end of the hallway were 2 bathrooms, one for boys and one for girls, and right next to them was a heavy gray door that led outside. It was almost always locked from the inside, but we were told it could be used in an emergency. The adults always warned us never to leave from that door because it would automatically lock behind us and we'd have no way of getting back inside the church. But anyway, back to the story. The whole downstairs had been decorated for Easter. Really decorated. The walls were covered in pastel streamers and little paper cutouts of lambs and crosses, and there were drawings of Jesus with kids taped up between the classroom doors. Some of the teachers had even worn those cheap bunny ears you get at CVS. It actually felt more festive down there than it had upstairs during Mass. All the kids were in a good mood too, probably because everyone knew there'd be egg hunts later in the day. Normally, I'd wait until class was over to go to the bathroom, but because the Easter service had run way longer than usual and I couldn't hold it, I raised my hand, asked to go, and the teacher excused me. The bathrooms were maybe 15 feet down the hall, and it wasn't uncommon for kids to go alone. They always said if we took too long, they'd check on us, but I don't remember that ever actually happening. So I slipped out quietly while the rest of the class was coloring pictures of the empty tomb and Jesus rising from it. I went into the boys' bathroom and shut the stall door behind me. It was quiet, but those bathrooms were old. All I could hear was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint sound of a teacher's voice echoing down the hallway. As I was sitting there, I suddenly heard this weird scraping sound coming from the stall next to mine. It didn't sound like anything normal, not like someone shifting or unlocking a door. It was slow, uneven, metallic, like something being dragged or scraped against the inside of the door. Not loud, but sharp. I don't remember being scared, just confused. At first, I thought it was another kid, so I kept quiet and finished my business. But as I was washing my hands, I looked into the mirror and saw that stall door opening slowly, and instead of another kid stepping out, it was a grown man wearing an Easter bunny costume. I remember the way the ears flopped forward and how the suit looked off. It was saggy and stained in places, like it had never been washed. The fur was this grayish white instead of bright white, and one of the eyes on the head looked like it had been sewn back on crooked. But the thing is, I don't remember being scared when I saw him, not then. Like I said, I was pretty young, and in my mind, this was just the Easter bunny making a surprise visit. I actually smiled when I turned around. I think I even said something like, "Hi." He didn't say anything at first, just stood there halfway out of the stall, staring at me. His head was tilted slightly, and he didn't move. I remember feeling a little awkward, like I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say something else. Then, after a long pause, he stepped all the way out and slowly raised one of his arms, pointing toward the door like he was guiding me out. That's when he finally spoke. His voice was muffled behind the costume, but I still remember the exact words. "You're the lucky chosen child. I have a gift for you outside." I didn't even hesitate. I was excited, genuinely thrilled at the idea that I'd been picked for some kind of special Easter surprise. I think the fact that this was happening in my church gave me a false sense of security or something. I pushed open the big gray door without thinking twice, not even remembering it was supposed to stay locked. The Easter bunny followed right behind, not saying anything else. He started walking across the pavement toward the far corner of the church parking lot. There was a car parked back there, mostly hidden from view by the dumpster and a few scraggly bushes. I remember thinking it was weird that he had parked so far away, and that he didn't even have a basket of candy or anything. At one point he started holding my hand. We were maybe halfway across the lot when I saw it. A second Easter bunny stepping out from the car he was leading me to. At first, I just stopped walking. My little brain didn't know what to make of it. I remember looking back and forth between the two of them, completely confused. I hadn't seen that car earlier, and now there were 2 Easter bunnies? Something about it didn't feel magical anymore. It just felt wrong. To this day, I've always thought of what happened next as an act of God. One of the teachers, I think her name was Miss Sabrina, just happened to be walking around the church, maybe heading out to prep for the egg hunt or check on something outside. She looked over at the parking lot right as I was being led toward the car. I'll never forget the sound she made. I've never heard a more terrifying scream in my life. The man in the costume immediately let go of my hand and bolted for the car, and without thinking, I took off running in the opposite direction toward Miss Sabrina. Once I was safe in her arms, I turned my head just in time to catch a glimpse of the car speeding out of the parking lot. I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure I saw another kid in the back seat of that car. Miss Sabrina wasn't even looking, but I told her what I had seen and she took me seriously. The next few hours are a little blurry. She alerted the other adults right away, and police eventually made me tell them what happened. They asked about the kid I said I saw in the back seat, and I did my best to describe him, even though I had only seen him for a split second, and I wasn't even sure if my mind was playing tricks on me. My parents were the most upset, and for good reason. I think my mom cried for an hour straight after we went home. The police followed up with the church, but nothing ever came of it. There were no missing children in the area, so the police didn't really have anything to work on. The running theory was that whoever had been in that costume somehow had a key to the back door and just sat in the bathroom waiting for a kid to use it. And by sheer misfortune, that kid had been me. I still find the whole thing deeply unsettling. Whoever had done that must have been familiar with the church's layout. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known where to park, where to wait, or how to get away with it all. But what scares me the most is that I think there really was a kid in the back seat of that car. It's hard for an Easter to come and go without me thinking about this experience. The Ozark Campers. Back when I was younger, me and my friends loved to go camping. Once we got our licenses at 16, we were out almost every weekend camping in new spots. Our parents didn't really care as long as we were able to protect ourselves. For this reason, my dad let us borrow one of his guns. It was a Taurus G2C. This happened when we were 18 and seniors in high school. In February, me and my girl Megan, my friend Colin, and his girlfriend Anne were going to drive to Arkansas and backpack the Ozarks to look at some natural waterfalls. It was a 9-hour drive from where we lived, so we left early and made it there around 7 p.m. We set up camp at one of the designated sites for the night since it was late and we were tired. My girl and I were sharing a tent, and Colin and his girl were sharing another. I had the gun in my tent. Nothing happened on the first night. The next morning, we woke up, made breakfast, and drove to the start of the trail. We were going to hike to a waterfall and then go find a place to set up camp. On the hike to the waterfall, Anne kept saying she saw someone standing still and staring at her, but that he had been following and she hadn't seen him move. So we stopped to look, and we saw a man quickly run away. Colin yelled at him to fuck off or we'd kick his ass, mostly probably for show to impress his girl. We were capable of defending ourselves though, if needed. We continued the hike and didn't see him again. We eventually made it to the waterfall, and there we had lunch and took pictures. After about 2 hours, we decided to go find a place to camp before it got dark. While we were looking for a place to set up camp, I noticed a freakishly tall, skinny woman staring at us. She had to be at least 6'5". It genuinely freaked me out. I pointed her out, and everyone else got unsettled too. We yelled at her to leave us alone and told her we had a gun. She turned around and walked away. We decided to hike further since we were all creeped out. We had no idea if the two weirdos were connected somehow. After another hour, we found a nice spot next to a small flowing creek with a relatively deep pool of water, so we decided to get in the water and relax. While we were splashing around, we talked about the earlier incidents and joked that they were probably hillbillies on drugs. When the sun started to set, we decided to get out and make dinner. We brought chicken breast to grill, rice and vegetables to boil, and some potatoes. We always ate well on our campouts. While I was cooking, Colin set up his tent and helped me with mine. I finished cooking, and we ate before cracking open some of the alcohol we brought. I was, and still am, a pretty heavy smoker. so I brought some weed and papers to roll up. We wanted to have a good time since we put a lot of money into this trip. We told stories and laughed in our intoxicated state. It got to a point where Colin fell out of his chair and just laid on the ground laughing. We did this late into the night and eventually went to our tents. Megan and I were messing around in our tent when we suddenly heard someone laughing outside. At first I thought it was Colin laughing at us for some reason, so I yelled, "What's so funny?" Colin yelled back, "That wasn't me." That sank my soul and immediately sobered me up. I grabbed the gun, rushed out of the tent, and fired a few shots into the air, yelling for whoever it was to leave us alone or I'd shoot them. That seemed to do the trick because I heard footsteps running away. We moved our tents closer together and decided to have one person stay up at a time as lookout. The next day, we debated going home early, but ultimately decided against it. We were sure we'd scared off whoever it was, so we planned to hike somewhere closer to the exit and camp for one final night. After breakfast, we packed up camp and started the hike back. During the hike, we ran into some other hikers and told them what had happened. They were freaked out too. We chatted for a bit, then continued on. When we stopped for lunch, I realized those were the only other people we'd seen so far, despite there being a ton of cars in the parking lot earlier. After lunch, we continued down the trail, and after about 6 miles, we decided to set up camp. We were around 3 miles from the nearest exit. We pitched our tents and cooked steak and potatoes for dinner. We ate, drank, and smoked again before heading to the tents. In the middle of the night, I woke up needing to pee, so I stepped out of the tent. Out of paranoia, I made sure to bring the gun. While I was peeing, I heard leaves crunching nearby. My heart immediately stopped. I grabbed the gun, finished up, pulled up my pants, and turned on my headlamp. The beam revealed the man from the day before standing in the distance, holding a machete. I could see him clearly this time. Long, dirty black hair and super lanky. I screamed and raised the gun as he started charging at me. I fired off every shot I had and must have hit him somewhere because I heard him yell and saw him fall. By now, Colin, Megan, and Anne were all awake. I told them to pack up. We needed to leave fast. I didn't want to involve the police since I wasn't sure if I could get charged for something, and honestly, his life didn't seem worth it. We didn't bother packing the tents since there wasn't time. We grabbed our bags and practically ran the final 3 miles, making it back to the cars in under an hour. We climbed in, locked the doors, and decided to sleep in the car for the night. We covered the windows and tried to get some rest. When we woke up in the morning, we left immediately and stopped for breakfast at a diner in a small town. We never called the cops, and I'm still conflicted about whether we should have. This happened years ago and no reports about it ever came out, so for all I know, those psychopaths are still out there. The manhunt game. I just graduated high school last year, which is when what I'm about to tell you took place. Easter has always been a fun time of the year for my friends and me, but not for the reason you think. We've outgrown those childish Easter egg hunts that everyone does when they're little, and I honestly cringe when my parents make me participate in one with my younger cousins. A few years ago, can't remember exactly when, my friends and I created a fun twist on the typical egg hunt format and devised our own game. It's not really that special. It's basically just a mashup of manhunt and an Easter egg hunt. It's 2 teams like manhunt, but the seekers are also responsible for hiding and protecting a few eggs. If the hiders manage to capture all the eggs, they win. And if the seekers don't find all the hiders within a certain time frame, the hiders also win. There are some other dumb rules, like how the seekers can't camp where the eggs are hidden and stuff like that. But that's not super relevant to the story. It was the Thursday before Easter, and school was canceled the next day for whatever reason. So we decided to have a sleepover that night. It was me, Jake, Race, Chuck, Arthur, and Raz. Raz wasn't actually his real name. His last name was Razzie, but everyone just called him Raz. His family had the biggest house by far, so we'd always chill there. He lived in the middle of nowhere, and his backyard bordered a decently sized wooded area. Plus, his parents were out of town until Friday night, so we'd have the place to ourselves. We were just chilling. playing video games in his basement when Chuck suggested we play Manhunt. We were all down, so we rounded up whatever flashlights Raz had in his garage. We used a random number generator on Jake's phone to pick teams, just to keep it fair and unpredictable. I was on a team with Chuck and Raz, and we were seeking. Jake and Arthur were hiding. Raz's mom had a ton of plastic eggs upstairs, so we grabbed a couple of them and all of us went outside. We'd played back there a bunch of times before, so we already knew the layout. The far boundary was the fence line, and the other edges were the creek and the back slope that ran down toward Raz's neighbor's horse pasture. We set timers on our phones to give the hiders enough time to hide, and us enough time to hide our eggs. Once 10 minutes passed, the game had officially begun. I should also mention that the sun had already gone down, but it wasn't completely dark yet. Once the timer went off, we all split up to cover more ground. I veered left into a thicker patch of trees while Raz and Chuck went the other way. I kept my hand over my flashlight, just skimming the ground every few steps so I wouldn't trip, but I mostly relied on the moonlight to see. The game was way more fun when you actually felt like you were sneaking around, and besides, if one of the hiders saw a flashlight beam coming toward them, they'd just run. A few minutes in, I thought I saw something move 20 or 30 feet in front of me. At first, I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, but then I saw it again. I instantly turned my flashlight off and froze. Someone was crouching behind a tree up ahead. Whoever it was must not have seen me, or they'd have run off. They weren't moving, like they were trying to stay perfectly still. My first guess was that it was Race. He always picked spots close to the seekers, thinking no one would expect it. I decided to try to get the jump on him. I crouched down a bit myself and started moving slowly, trying to circle around behind him. When I got close enough, I sprang forward and lunged at whoever was crouching there, tapping him hard on the shoulder and yelling, "Gotcha!" But the second he turned around, a wave of fear washed over me. It wasn't any of my friends. It was a grown man with slicked back hair and these wide-open eyes, like he was on drugs. His clothes were torn up and he smelled awful. I was so taken aback that I didn't even realize what was happening. Before I could react, he tackled me to the ground. I screamed as I hit the dirt, but before I could yell again, his hands were around my throat. He was pressing down with all his weight, and in that moment I honestly thought my life was over. I couldn't breathe, and I didn't have the strength to overpower him from that position. And then, out of nowhere, he stopped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flashlight beam bouncing off the trees somewhere behind us. One of my friends must have been running toward us. The guy must have seen the light too, because he jumped off without saying a word and ran straight into the woods, disappearing almost immediately. I just lay there gasping for air, still too stunned to move. A few seconds later, Chuck reached me, helped me up, and said he had seen the whole thing. I wanted to chase after that guy, but Chuck told me it was an awful idea, so the two of us ran back toward the house instead. Chuck called the rest of the crew and told everyone to go back to Raz's house immediately. Once we all reconvened, I told everyone what had happened, and after Chuck filled in the gaps, everyone started talking over each other. But then Arthur said something that shut all of us up. He said that before the game even started, meaning before the initial 10 minutes were up, he saw two people walking through the trees near where he was hiding. He said they were moving slowly, like they were scouting or waiting for something, and he'd actually gotten pissed at the time because he thought it was two of the Seekers teaming up and breaking the rules. That's when me, Chuck, and Raz all looked at each other and immediately shook our heads. None of us had been walking together, and there was no way we could have gotten all the way to their side in such a short time frame anyway. The realization hit us at once. If it wasn't any of us, then there were at least 3 other people out in those woods that night, 1 who attacked me, and 2 more who were moving around before the game had even started. In that moment, I realized how smart I had been for listening to Chuck and not chasing after my attacker. He might have saved me from walking headfirst into an ambush. I told everyone we needed to call the cops. I mean, I had literally been attacked. But the second I said it, Raz cut me off. He got weirdly serious and said, "No, we're not calling anyone." I asked him what in the world he was talking about, and he said he was technically grounded, and beyond that, he wasn't allowed to host anyone while his parents were out of town, so involving the cops would get him in serious hot water. I told him this was a serious situation and worth involving the police, but he didn't budge. The rest of the guys were stuck in the middle. No one wanted to put Raz in a bad spot with his parents, but I could tell they all had a hard time pretending the whole thing didn't happen. Eventually, I caved and agreed not to call the police and to try to enjoy the rest of the night, but I was seriously shaken. I ended up going to bed early and left Raz's house the next morning before anyone else woke up. This might surprise some of you, but I actually wasn't too affected by the experience. I'm very much of the mentality that things happen and people move on, so that's what I did. Anyway, about a week after everything went down, Raz told us he felt bad just leaving those Easter eggs out in the woods, so he had gone to collect them even though he was scared out of his mind. We all got a good laugh out of that, but his comment made me think back to that night and reflect a little. I have no idea what those men were doing in those woods that night, but I can confidently say that I won't be spending the night at Raz's place anytime soon. The crosses in the woods. Anyway, I'm at college now and I'm far, far away from Raz's backyard, but with Easter coming up next month, I got reminded of this story. Every Easter, my entire extended family takes the trip out to my Uncle John's house, who lives way out in the sticks. This past year was no different. Uncle John lives in a huge house that sits on a wide open stretch of land surrounded by woods on all sides. Even though I've been there many times, I'd never actually wandered out into the woods behind his house before. I'm not much of a nature person, so I never had much interest in the outdoors. To tell you the truth, I was dreading the trip. I've never really related much to that side of my family. They're all super outdoorsy, into hunting and fishing and stuff like that. And most of them have lived in the same place their whole lives. Anytime I'm around them, I feel kind of like the odd one out. On top of that, most of my cousins are way older than me, already married with kids or working on some kind of farm. The only one remotely close to my age is Kevin. He's a couple of years older and actually pretty chill. We always end up sticking together during these family trips by default. He knows I don't really fit in with the rest of them, so he's usually good about keeping me company without making it weird. Anyway, we made the drive to Uncle John's late Friday night. I'm an only child, so it was just my parents and me in the car. I was exhausted from the drive, so I went to bed almost immediately. The next morning, Kevin and I spent a couple of hours in Uncle John's basement playing pool. Neither of us was any good, but it was better than sitting around upstairs. The house was already packed with relatives by then. You know what the usual holiday chaos is like. So we mostly stayed downstairs, low-key avoiding it all. There wasn't a TV down there, so Kevin played some music off his phone and we talked about dumb family drama not worth mentioning. While we played, Kevin kept going on about the woods behind Uncle John's house. He said they stretched for miles and hardly anyone ever went far enough to see the cool stuff out there. He talked about how magical it felt and how beautiful the isolation was. I mostly just nodded along. Nature talk wasn't really my thing, but he clearly loved it. I'm not sure how, but later that day, Kevin convinced me to go on a nature walk with him. Like I said, I'm not a nature person by any means, but I was dying of boredom, which is probably why I agreed. We obviously told Uncle John where we were going. He's a really nice guy and always lets us younger people do what we want, a mentality I wish my own parents shared. Kevin took the lead once we got outside, cutting across the backyard and into the tree line like he'd done it 100 times before, which, knowing him, he probably had. The woods were thick but not totally wild. There was a kind of natural path that Kevin was following. It wasn't late in the day, so I wasn't super worried about the sun setting, but the deeper we went, the more I started to wonder how we'd find our way back. After about 20 minutes of walking, I asked Kevin if he was sure he knew where we were, and he just laughed. He told me he knew these woods like the back of his hand and had been exploring them since he was a kid. We walked for maybe another 20 minutes when we both stopped at the same time. From somewhere up ahead, we heard a loud thunk, like something heavy slamming into wood. It didn't sound like an animal or someone stepping on a branch. It was recurring. A pause, then another hit, then another pause, then another hit. It sounded like a hammer or mallet being driven against a tree. That's the best way I can describe it. Kevin looked at me, and I could tell he was trying to figure it out too. The sound didn't seem close, but it was loud enough to be clear. He told me it wasn't impossible for a hunter to be wandering around out there, but even so, he definitely looked a little startled. Eventually, the sound stopped. I asked if he wanted to turn back, but he shook his head. I could tell he was curious now, and I'll admit, I was too. So we kept walking in the direction we thought the sound had come from, both of us on high alert. We'd only been walking for a few more minutes when Kevin suddenly stopped and held his arm out in front of me. I froze, thinking maybe he'd seen someone in front of us, but then he pointed up into the trees. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing, but then it hit me. There were 3 upside-down crosses nailed into 3 adjacent trees, way higher up than anyone could have reached without a ladder. Easily 15, maybe 20 feet off the ground. Before we could even turn to leave, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around, and to my horror, there was a person standing there. He was dressed like a lumberjack, with a thick beard and a very dark stare. Kevin stepped in front of me, partially shielding me from the guy's view. The man stared at me specifically and said, "You shouldn't be here." Kevin immediately apologized and told him we were just leaving, which is exactly what we did. The guy didn't move as we left. He just stared us down as we walked back the way we had come. I could feel my hands shaking. We walked back in silence, and I've never experienced a more tense moment in my life. The 2 of us kept turning around, trying to see if we were being followed, but there was no way to tell for sure. When we finally made it back to the house, we told Uncle John first thing. Like I said, he's a friendly guy and knows all his neighbors. So I got a sick feeling in my stomach when he said no one he knew matched our description of the guy in the woods. He asked a bunch of times if we had been followed, and we told him no. There wasn't much else any of us could do. Someone floated the idea of arming up and sweeping the woods, but Uncle John wanted to avoid confrontation and didn't want to lead anyone back to his house. So Kevin and I went back downstairs to chill, and the rest of the relatives went back to whatever they'd been doing, likely planning for the Easter festivities. That whole encounter messed with my head way more than I let on. I went to bed pretty early that night just to get my mind off it. But because of that, I woke up way earlier than usual, like way earlier. I rolled over, checked my phone, and saw it was just after 5 a.m. The sun had barely started poking over the horizon, but it was still mostly dark. I tried to fall asleep again, but I couldn't, so I decided to start my day early. Uncle John has a study on the 3rd floor, so I went up there to see if there were any interesting books. His study has this big old window that overlooks the entire backyard. As I walked past it, something caught my eye. A very faint, flickering glow coming from the edge of the woods. It looked like the pulsing light of a small fire, not a flashlight or anything that bright. I stood there for a good 30 seconds just staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I needed to know what it was, so I went downstairs and stepped out onto the back deck. When I realized what I was looking at, I had to fight back a scream. There were at least 3 figures standing just past the edge of the woods, each holding a small torch. They weren't walking or moving around. They were just standing there, facing the house, facing me. I ran straight to Uncle John's room and woke him up, telling him what I saw. Without any questions, he grabbed his rifle, threw on a pair of pants, and told me to stay inside. He marched out onto the back deck and scanned the yard while I watched from the doorway. By that time, those people had retreated back into the woods. Without hesitation, he aimed his rifle up into the air and fired it 3 times. That woke up the whole house, and the next 20 minutes were complete chaos. I can't think of a worse way to spend an Easter morning. The whole holiday was basically ruined after that, and everyone was on edge for the entire day. Eventually, it came time for my parents and me to leave, and I can't say I was upset about it. This was about 9 months ago. and Uncle John has since told us he hasn't seen or experienced anything strange. Still, I would hate to live in that house knowing there are psychos lurking somewhere nearby. I'll send an update if Uncle John tells us anything of note.